Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It is lovely to have you on this first series of conversations. I'm Elna Rudolph, and on behalf of the World Association for Sexual Health, I would love to welcome you to this series of conversations. We have over 500 participants on this platform today and more people joining via Facebook Live. And we'd love for you to let us know in the chat where you are from and to say hello. And you're also welcome to ask questions to the panelists during their presentations, and please just indicate which of the panelists you would like to answer your question. The World Association for Sexual Health, or WAS, is a global organization with membership from over 100 organizations across the globe. WAS is hosting this series of monthly conversations that begins today to prepare the way towards the 25th Congress of WAS, planned to be hosted in South Africa. The first time the World Congress is coming to Africa. I'm the president of the Congress, and Essert, who's one of our speakers today, is the honorary president. This series of conversations is aimed at reflecting on the current situation and its impact on sexual health and to prepare for the future. I would like to thank the Planning Committee of the Congress for all of the hard work that you've already put in, especially during these uncertain times and with the demands being higher on all of us. The committee of the conference consists of the WAS executives. I would like to introduce you to all of them. Michelle, if you can please just get all of them on the screen. Let me just see if I can see all of them, just to say hello to all of you. I've got them on my screen in a certain order, so I'll present to you Esther Corona. She's the Vice President of WAS. And we've got Essert there from Nigeria. He's the Honorary President of the Congress. And PEDRO NOBRE is the President of WAS. And Alan Jami is the Chair of the Scientific Committee. Eric Janssen is the Vice Chair of the Scientific Committee. Louis Perelman is our Secretary General, and Anthony is our President of SASHA, the local organization, and Marlene Wasserman is the Chair of the local Scientific Committee. So I just wanted all of you to see who they are and to thank them personally for their contribution. So we are hosting this series of monthly conversations. Oh, no, sorry, I have lost my place here already. Our theme for the next Congress is to leave no one behind. And this is what we're doing through these conversations. Nobody should be left behind. Please engage with us via Facebook and share your thoughts and ideas. We value it. I'm so happy to see that we have people here from all over the world today, and we would love to continue to engage with you going forward. Please stay with us for about 90 minutes. We will host this webinar and finish by 90 minutes from now. And then without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to our moderator of this session. It will be Esther Corona, who will introduce the topic and the speakers to you. Esther is a Mexican and has been working in the field of sexuality education, sexual health, and gender for over 50 years. 50 years. This is the kind of experience we have here today. Her organization was one of the founding members of WAS. She is currently an international independent consultant working with several United Nations agencies. Esther, over to you.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to be here and seeing all our audience. The theme of this conversation today is a time of crisis, a time for change, transforming sexual health and rights beyond COVID-19. It is true. In a time such as this one that we're living, there is a great challenge to find solutions for the situations that we have that are already here. But we also have the opportunity to stop and to look further ahead and to imagine what kind of world we want to live in and what kind of problems we're having that we already had before that have been magnified by the pandemic. Sexual health and sexual rights are aspirations that lead us towards equality and justice and ultimately well-being. This is one of the reasons that in this time of confinement and isolation, WAS is taking advantage of the incredible opportunity of having us together, of technology bridging time and space. And so we can discuss sexual rights and sexual health. And today, to start this series of conversations, we have a very, very distinguished panel. I'm going to introduce to you our speakers and then turn on for the first one. In the first place, speaking from Porto, Portugal, PEDRO NOBRE. Currently, he's our WAS president. He is professor of psychology and he's director of the doctoral program in human sexuality at Porto University. He will address the role of WAS in the time of crisis to transform sexual health and rights beyond COVID-19. Next, from Lagos, Nigeria, Esiet. He's honorary president of the future 25th Congress of WAS that you heard we hope to be holding quite soon, as soon as the circumstances allow us, in South Africa. He's a member of the executive board and he's convener of the African Conference on Sexual Health and Rights. And last, of course, but not least, Owen will focus on Africa, sexual health in Africa during COVID-19. And finally, we have Esther Kismori, who's participating from Geneva, Switzerland. And she is the chief executive of the world-recognized journal, Sexual and Reproductive Health Matters. Esther is a very well-known international human rights lawyer and was expert consultant who will reflect on sexual rights as a matter of health and accountability during and beyond COVID-19. So here we have our distinguished panelists who will be speaking for about 12 minutes. And we will have a brief warning before the end of the talk of each one. So without much further talk from me, I'll give the floor to PEDRO, please. PEDRO.
Thank you very much, Esther. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening to everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. As I can see people from all over the world, from North America to South America, Africa, all over Europe, and also Asia and Oceania. So it is great to have you all here. And I will also take this opportunity to thank to my colleagues. I mean, Elna already introduced all of them, but this was not possible without the collective work of all of us and WAS members. So thank you very much for that. So today I will briefly speak about what is the role of WAS during this crisis. And I will do a bit of introduction to what we do at the World Association for Sexual Health. I guess that most of you will be aware of WAS, but maybe some of you are do not know much about what we do. So it is also an opportunity to spread the message and to share our aims and goals and mission. So WAS is a multidisciplinary organization. It's a global international organization with more than 40 years. So we are probably the largest international association working on sexual health and sexual rights. And we represent over 100 organizations from all over the world and thousands of professionals coming from a variety of backgrounds and disciplines. And I think this is also a unique characteristic of WAS, which distinguishes us from other global organizations, which is the fact that we are multidisciplinary in nature, which means that we have people working from different backgrounds, but all of them focused on sexuality related topics, on sexual health and on sexual rights. Our mission statement, so our main aim is actually to promote sexual health and sexual rights across the globe and throughout the human lifespan. So, of course, this is a very ambitious and global mission. And one important thing that I want to also to discuss a bit is the concept of sexual health, because sexual health, it's not merely the absence of a disease, of a dysfunction, infirmity, etc. Sexual health is a main component, let's say, of global health in a way, and it's related to a physical state of a physical and emotional and mental state related to sexuality, which is very closely linked also with well-being in general. So the idea of sexual health also includes the idea of a positive sexuality, of a respectful approach towards sexuality, free of coercion, free of discrimination, free of violence, but also the possibility of having satisfying and pleasurable sexual experience in sexual life. So the positive part of sexuality is a key concept on the definition of sexual health, which I should say that this is a definition by the World Health Organization, originally from 2002, where WAS also played a very important role. So what is the main, so how does WAS promote sexual health and sexual rights? What are our main actions and strategic actions? I will just briefly say that we are global organizations, as I said, and most of you know, but we cannot we cannot accomplish our mission if we don't establish strategic partnerships with other global organizations. And I think this is a key aspect. So in our work, we are very keen to develop strategic partnerships, especially with other main and broader global organizations, such as the World Health Organization, WHO, but also a number of UN agencies with whom we have actually official relations or strong relations and common projects. I will name UNFPA, which is also strategic, UNAIDS, UNESCO, and besides UN agencies, we also have strong connections and partnership with IPPF, for example. So this is one very important thing, which is working in partnership with other global organizations. One of our landmarks is actually the Declaration of Sexual Rights. So the first edition of this declaration was Declaration on Sexual Rights, has more than 20 years. It was released in 1999. And actually, during the last years, we have been updating and the declaration. In 2014, there's a new Declaration on Sexual Rights, which also links sexual rights mostly to what we can call basic human rights. So I just want to emphasize this, the importance of the connection between sexual health and sexual rights. They are very, very interconnected, and it's very difficult to achieve or to have good sexual health if you don't have sexual rights, and the other way around. And also the importance of this relationship with the broader aspects or dimensions of human rights at a broader level. So sexual rights are part of human rights. Another example, which was a relatively recent of our work, was the role of WAS in the new international classification of diseases from WHO. So the so-called ICD-11. And this was actually a very huge transformation, because there's a specific chapter now on this ICD-11 on sexuality-related conditions, which in a way was a very important mark or landmark, because it let's say, included sexuality-related aspects and conditions and difficulties into a chapter which is away from mental disorders, which was happening in the previous, not only ICD, but actually also DSM from APA. So the idea of depathologizing sexual disorders or sexual related conditions was very important, and from now on we will have this specific chapter on sexuality related conditions, which is very important for many people. It's, I would say, particularly for transgender rights issues. Besides that, we are also, one regular activity is the WAS statements. We release in the last 2 weeks, we released 3, I would say, important WAS statements on different aspects. The last one, or one of the first, was on actually what we will talk today on sexual rights in the context of this global COVID pandemic crisis. We also released recently a message of solidarity to call for an end to systematic racism and violence against historically discriminated racial and ethnic groups. And this is an important message of solidarity also with what happened in the US recently. And actually, 2 days ago, if I remember correctly, we released a specific statement also on LGBTQI+ rights, particularly on Eastern countries, where those rights are especially under attack in the last days or weeks and months. One, I would say, one very important activity of WAS is also the World Sexual Health Day. We celebrate every year on the 4th of September, the World Sexual Health Day. We started in 2010, so now it's in the 11th edition. And this year, the World Sexual Health Day will be dedicated to sexual pleasure in times of COVID-19. So please stay tuned. We will have probably one special session dedicated to this sexual pleasure in the times of COVID-19 around 4th of September. And this is also important because the most recent WAS declaration was actually on sexual pleasure, the WAS Sexual Pleasure Declaration, which was approved at the General Assembly and presented at Mexico, our last World Congress in Mexico last year, 2019. And it's a very important declaration because we will put sexual pleasure at the core of sexual health and sexual rights. And this is very important because usually pleasure is seen as something which is secondary. We talk about reproductive rights, we talk about human rights, but pleasure is at the core of sexual health. There's no sexual health and satisfaction without pleasure. And so sexual pleasure is also in itself a human right, a sexual right. Besides that, we have, let me just share briefly that we have also a project which is very important because it's a project of developing a whole observatory on sexual health. We are partnered with WHO in a global survey on sexual health. We are actually also, many of us at WAS are also playing an important role in a new project which will be actually conducting a survey globally in several countries around the world. The project is called iShare and will actually ask people in different countries around the world about what was the implication of the COVID-19 on their sexual health. So finally, what can we do during these times? What can you do differently? So this is times of crisis, challenges, but also times of opportunities. And although there's limited data so far, we already know some of the main challenges, and I think that Esther Kismodi and also UMSET will address some of them, so I won't go into detail. But we are aware that domestic violence is increasing, that sexual and gender diverse individuals are more at risk of violence and discrimination. We also know that access to reproductive health services is less available. There's some increase on gender inequalities and also threats, particularly to the most marginalized groups. There's in some countries an uprise of anti-sexual rights agendas, which has been increasing specifically in specific countries. And at the more individual level, of course, there's increased pressure on relationships related to the confinement and the diminished liberty of sexual expression and satisfaction and national and regional level. So we are, I would say, much more united in our causes and work together to achieve our mission. We have also seen an increased number of manifestations throughout the world, not only about sexual rights in particular, but I would say to defend human rights at the global level. And the Black Lives Matter movement is one example of that. And we have seen also ultimately in the last days positive examples at the legal level, like the Supreme Court at the US about LGBT rights, for instance. And I would say that also at the more individual and relationship level, I mean, all of these problems related to confinement, COVID, etc. Of course, they increase challenges, they increase risk, but they also create opportunities to new discoveries on new relationships, on new aspects of sexuality, on new experiences, and we are seeing also a lot of that. So there's not much research, but the one that exists is indicating that not everything is bad, let's put it this way, not everything is worse at that level. So we have now a number of activities to increase our ability to promote sexual health and sexual rights, research-wise, and also use our resources as a hub of resources and information related to COVID and to confinement and all of this pandemic crisis, and increasing our partnership activities, again, with all our members and our global partners. One last word just to say, before I give the word again to Esther, to say that for us, evidence-based information is very important. There's a lot of speculation about what is the impact, but we need to have data, reliable data. And again, I will just share with you this idea of the new project on the global survey, iShare, which will collect data. So please participate, please spread the word, because it's very important for us to have data in order to, I would say, to do what we are able to do or what we need to do to achieve our mission, which is influence public policies at the end. Finally, everything that we do because of many people work together. So if you are an organization, a member of an organization, or an individual member who is willing to work together to achieve this mission, these goals, please join WAS. It's very easy process. We need you, and together we will make this work better. And also to conclude, next year, probably we're not sure yet because of all of this, but we plan to have our face-to-face, in-person meeting, world meeting in a great city, Cape Town, in South Africa, in Africa. And this will be the first World Congress ever in Africa. And I think that is also a very important message. So please join us, and please join us in Cape Town for the World Congress. Thank you very much. And I'll pass the word now to Esther.
Thanks, Pedro. Pedro, you have set the scene, the international and the global scene. Next, we will hear what is happening in Africa from UM. But before turning the floor to I just want to give a very special welcome to all our membership all over the world, because this is what makes us strong. The fact that we are in all over the world, in 5 continents, spanning all space and this time now. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Esther, and good day to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you and to share with you my thoughts and highlights for your consideration. Africa as a continent has a very interesting romance with sexual health. As you all will recall, in 1994, the International Conference on Population and Development took place in Cairo, Egypt. And you will therefore presume that Africa should be very much interested in that document, that in itself became the watershed document that opened up the space for the global discourse on sexual health. Interestingly, before then, in 1975, the World Health Organization had a declaration on sexual health. And that technical document was not well romanced, let me use that word with great emphasis. And I had the privilege to join WAS team in 1999, 2000, that interrogated that document to try and bring it in line with what we felt will help the world to move ahead. In 2005, the African Union Commission set about the process of having a continental framework for access to sexual and reproductive health and rights in Africa. And that document is referred to as the Maputo Plan of Action. That document in itself is historic. Howbeit, that document, rather than look at sexual and reproductive health, focused more on reproductive health outcomes, and if you looked at the determinant probably around culture that affected reproductive outcomes, especially around female genital mutilation and harmful traditional practices. This document, as is, has been updated to respond to the Sustainable Development Goals and is now further available as a policy guide for governments and similar institutions in Africa. Last year, Africa again had the privilege to host the world in Nairobi at the 25th anniversary of the International Conference on Population and Development, and there were several commitments from governments from around the world and governments for Africa. Significant as all of these may be, I want to put it on the table that all of these efforts have not adequately addressed the issue of sexual health in Africa. Two things I must say to justify this. First is that in Africa, the issue of sexuality is like a taboo in terms of public discourse and conversations. And the concept of sexual rights has been treated as if it's an alien or something that is coming from outer space onto Africa. Howbeit, we do know that Africa, like in every other continent, people have continued to find sexual expression in line with several other things that they do. But the collective outcome is this: we as a continent suffer a lot from the disease burden due of sexual health and sexual rights because we are not interrogating sexual health as we ought to. And I'm going to share with you a few of the things that have been very challenging on the continent prior to COVID-19. They are still challenging during COVID-19. First is the understanding that sexuality can only be in a binary expression. The spectrum is not between female and male or male and female. The spectrum is more diverse. And in Africa, it will appear that consistently our policy spaces have continued to ignore the rights of people who are not male or female. If you self-describe in Africa in any other form, you are going to be faced with several challenges, and we have continued to see that Africa remains largely a homophobic continent where people do not seem to understand and embrace the spectrum of normalcy that includes all the people who we classify. Some are transgender, some are lesbians, some are homosexuals, some are queer, and some describe themselves as non-conformist and every other diverse groups. So, which means therefore that if we must attain the Sustainable Development Goal in line with the pledge of each and every nation of leaving no one behind, all such persons, we must ensure that their dignity as persons and their rights are upheld so that they can attain their sexual health. And again, we must respect and promote the access of each and everyone to their sexuality and sexuality expression. Now let me come to look at sexuality more broadly on the continent. One of the challenges we continue to have is that the language, the word sexuality in itself has been unduly attacked or bastardized or fought against, because in my perception, many people in the policy space in Africa do not understand that sexuality is not circumscribed to any particular group and does not exclude anybody. In fact, sexuality is what we experience throughout our lifespan, and it can be said that the expression of our sexuality is the core of our humanity, and we really need to be more open to the fact that everybody is a sexual being, even though not everyone may choose to express all forms or any form or some form of their sexuality all of the time. Now, what has COVID done? COVID came to us as a pandemic, and we were unprepared. And the first reaction, which was policy driven, was the lockdown. And I want to say that anecdotal evidence suggests that whilst the lockdown may have some health merits or medical merits as it is, the challenge is that enforcing the lockdown became a pandemic on its own on the continent. Just yesterday, the BBC Africa reported that in Kenya alone, 15 people were killed in the course of enforcing the lockdown. And you must recognize that this is not peculiar to Kenya, the same in Uganda, Nigeria, South Africa, across the continent. What happened? The law enforcement agencies, in trying to enforce the lockdown, killed people when COVID did not kill them. And what does this say? That there is a continuous aggression, state aggression. And that state aggression has implications for the issues of sexual health and sexual rights. Health systems are challenged, services are not available, there is no support for anyone who requires to find full expression of his or her sexuality during the lockdown, especially if that person is not locked down with his or her and or partner. That is one. Two is that the aggression that we saw during the lockdown suggests that we have continued not to respect the issue of human rights as we ought to in general. And therefore, to respect the human rights as it relates to sexuality becomes more difficult. The third is that access to information and other supportive services. And I'm happy that the President PEDRO had spoken about the pandemic of gender-based violence, sexual and gender-based violence. This was so bad that the UN Secretary General had to call for a global ceasefire. And from what colleagues have shared with me from across Africa, it is even worse for people who are LGBTQI, people who have disabilities, people, the more vulnerable people are, the worse the violence that they experience. I am very disturbed that despite all the efforts to advance sexual health and sexual rights, this is where we are. And I continue to look at COVID-19 as a unique opportunity that all of us, we should be able to take forward the principles as espoused by the International Conference on Population and Development and the World Association for Sexual Health, WAS, and promote the 16 sexual rights subsets, not excluding anyone, but promoting all together, that everyone has a right to human dignity. And therefore, for them to enjoy their dignity, they must also enjoy their right to their sexuality. In this regard, therefore, we need to break down the barriers in Africa that have continued to separate us and that have continued to make us stigmatize and discriminate against each other. I know that yes, stigma and discrimination has been a feature or an outcome of COVID-19, but we need to reverse it. Everybody cannot and will not find love and give love the same way. Just like it was said by a Christian preacher that I don't know, I picked up the phrase, you cannot whistle a symphony. You need an orchestra to deliver a symphony. And therefore, to deliver sexual health and sexual rights in Africa, we need all of us to come together, enlarge the space, bring in people who have not been with us, on board with us, cross barriers, use culture, interrogate culture positively, use religion, interrogate it positively, and engage with policymakers, and let us embrace the right of each and every one. I will leave all of us with this singular statement. If you want to go far, go alone. But if you want to make the desired impact, please come on board and let's go together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, for this call to action in Africa. While you have pointed out many of the problems that have been ensuing after COVID, you have also highlighted some of the opportunities that these unfortunate circumstances gives us. Sexual health is also linked strongly, as we have heard, with sexual rights, and we need to hold accountable all those working in the field, and we need to hold accountable ourselves. So next we will hear Esther Kismodi discussing this very issue, and Please, Esther, I give the floor to Esther right now.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate to be here, and I'm really welcoming vast effort to addressing sexual rights and sexual health in the context of this crisis, and also in some countries considered to be partly post-crisis situation, not knowing what is happening next. So that is why accountability, investigating accountability based on the learned experience from the past 3 months especially, is really important and beyond. I would like to start to reminding us how PEDRO started his presentation or welcoming, reminding us that sexual health and taking accountability for sexual health and sexual rights requires, on one hand, a positive, respectful approach to sexuality and sexual relationship, as well as creating an enabling environment, including providing services to have pleasurable sexual experiences and providing protective and proactive measures to prevent and deal with coercion and violence related sexuality and sexual health. The COVID-19 situation imposed a particular situation in relation to the respect, protection, and fulfillment of sexual rights, especially from the perspective how states imposed various restrictive measures in general and in relation to sexual and reproductive health, how they failed to act, and how they intentionally obstructed sexual rights, as PEDRO also mentioned, especially abusing arbitrarily government power in state emergency situations. According to human rights law, in crisis, states has a possibility to restrict human rights. However, according to international agreements, and also as it enshrined in national laws, the measures need to be based on scientific evidence. It has to be strictly necessary, the least intrusive and restrictive means available, should be neither arbitrary nor discriminatory in application, and can be applied only for a limited duration and subject to review. Many states failed to apply human rights law in crisis in relation to sexual health, how they applied restrictive measures, and failed the human rights test, as it called the Syracuse principle. The past months showed to us that the documented and estimated harm from restricting access to sexual health services are considerable. The potential scale of death and disability resulting from the closure of essential sexual health services, including safe abortion and contraceptive services, suggests not only how essential sexual health services are, but how likely government restrictions fail to protect and fulfill sexual rights and fail to live up to their accountability obligation related to sexual health. The restriction and denial of services disregards and dismiss scientific evidence, failing the human rights test on restrictive measures. Access to condom, contraception, including emergency contraception, and abortion in particular, are time-sensitive services. Delays and denials on provision of services leading to unsafe abortion with severe impact on women's health, for example. Just an example coming from Guttmacher Institute, but now we are getting increasing evidence actually from the field, including from Mary Stopes International and others. An estimated 10% proportional decline in use of short and long-acting reversible contraceptive methods in low and middle-income countries would result in 15 million unintended pregnancies over a year, leading in turn to unsafe abortion, increased maternal mortality and morbidity and mortality and negative health outcomes. That links one of the questions from a colleague from India who is asking how to control and address unwanted pregnancies. As Owen pointed out, gender-based violence, one of the most severe violations of human rights, has emerged as a shadow pandemic, with alarming reports from helplines, service organizations, and authorities across the globe. Lockdowns increase time spent with the abuser in situational high stress, limit survivor access to services and support networks, and shrink their opportunities to live. As again, when pointed out, LGBTI persons are at heightened risk of violence, with many youth confined at home with unsupportive or even hostile family members. As Helen Clark pointed out in a recent webinar on universal health coverage and COVID, the COVID-19 pandemic is not just a health crisis, it's a full-blown economic and social crisis that is impacting the lives and livelihoods of billions of people, including in relation to sexual health. The experience of the crisis demonstrates that mutually dependent relationship between the health, security, and universal health coverage for sexual and reproductive health, and how the long-standing underinvestment in both universal health coverage and sexual health renders us all vulnerable. Strict necessity, in terms of what is strict necessity in a situation like this, and pose the question very early on what count essential sexual and reproductive health service. And the question reveal and perpetuate deep-rooted political and ideological rifts about sex, reproduction, and sexualities, as it is brilliantly explained, for example, in Marta Schaaf and her colleagues' paper in Sexual and Reproductive Health on a special collection on COVID-19 in sexual and reproductive health and rights. Mandated clinic closures, limits on movement, disrupted supply chains, and health system mean that exacerbated the critical need for sexual and reproductive health services. We need to realize that as this pandemic spreads differently in various countries, and various countries has differently respond to the crisis in their level of availability to cope with the consequences, we need to differentiate between how they progressively learn and realize, and what kind of, to address the situation, and what immediate measures they need to do, including not to discriminate against certain populations. We must recognize that the efforts to sustain system in long run cannot substitute for new strategies, and although we are just in a couple of months into the crisis, we learned a lot, and there is an increasing documentation about good practices, and also that what practices cause harm. We must encourage alternative supply options where services are limited, especially as it comes to sexual and reproductive health services, because sexual and reproductive health services and sexual health services without crisis situations are already arbitrarily limited. So we need to explore new ways to deliver supplies and services in the face of social distancing, and advance regulatory approval of new quality assured products. For example, emergency contraception, medical abortions. There are some countries in this world who put medical abortion on the essential medicines list during the crisis situation, recognizing that this is the only available way in this situation to provide services to more vulnerable populations, or, for example, hormonal services and treatment for transgender people. There are practical and easily implemented solutions that will release and pressure on the health system, free up providers, and to ensure access to life-saving services are maintained. These solutions include telemedicine, easy access to, for example, mifepristone and misoprostol, antiretroviral drugs, removal of unnecessary waiting periods, and digital sexuality education initiative about the availability of services that maybe Esther can address a little bit further. Some of the problems caused by the barrier to accessing sexual health services can be mitigated. For example, with the provision of up-to-date and comprehensive information with effective task shifting, sharing between healthcare providers. As Mary Stubbs International in their recent report points out, In many countries, pharmacies and patent-strong vendors are not allowed to sell products directly to users by regulation based on outdated safety or market protection efforts, and compulsory waiting periods, as I mentioned, for certain services such as for abortion or for transgender medicine can put further demands on and delays in already overwhelmed healthcare system, or for example on accessibility of condoms, as Chris Purdy very early on March 20 reported to the world about the impact of restrictive measures on the supply chain. These barriers should be lifted to ease access to services following criteria highlighted in the widely available, although often not followed, WHO evidence-based practice guidelines. And talking about the vulnerables, as it has been mentioned before, the whole government measures affect the most vulnerable and documented. The COVID-19 is also imposing changes in all income levels in terms of balancing service delivery between the public and private sector, or between the formal and informal sector, as it is as sexual health services provided in many countries. So the question is that how do we promote accountability in this changing environment? States should proactively take this opportunity to protect the gains that have been made already before the crisis and develop new ways to move towards greater accountability for equitable realization of sexual and reproductive health and rights. As UNAIDS points out, 40 years of responding to the HIV epidemic has generated significant experience and lessons learned on the importance of a human rights-based approach, including, for example, in relation to criminalization, to ensuring effective and proportionate response to epidemics. Key among them is need to have a community-centered and informed response, as we learned also from the Ebola crisis that maybe UE can respond to. One that embraces solidarity and kindness, that prioritizes the most vulnerable, and that empowers people to be able to take action to protect themselves and others from the virus. It was not really the case, as it has been shown in the past couple of months. As the Global Network of Sex Project and UNAIDS joint statement points out, the COVID-19 pandemic, as with other health crises, exposed existing inequalities and disproportionately affects people who are already criminalized, such as sex workers. As a result, sex workers all over the world are experiencing hardship, a total loss of income, and increased discrimination and harassment. The criminalization of various aspects of sex work in the majority of countries serves to magnify the already precarious situation of sex workers in the informal economy. As sex workers and then clients self-isolate, sex workers are left unprotected, increasingly vulnerable, and unable to provide for themselves and their families. In the opposite end, a positive example shows that when sex work is recognized as in the labor context and in the context of protection of rights, sex workers were allowed, for example, for unemployment benefits, and sex workers helped sexual educators to put out messages how safe sex can be experienced and practiced during the COVID-19 crisis, considering how the virus is being spread. For the good of their people and their economies, we need to strong political leadership that WAS can assist to create at the state level, at the intergovernmental level, at the UN level, to accelerate the expansion of UHC in relation to sexual health, including on the time of this crisis. And that's why I think this webinar series is. In line with commitment made at the last UN high-level meeting, for example, on UHC, and with the focus on rights in the past two WAS conference. This, of course, includes meeting the needs of women adolescents, transgender people, people living with disability, and measuring the best practices that are available. Donors and others from high-income settings could benefit from reorienting their funding and modalities of working to the priorities of governments and civil society in low and middle-income countries, for example, through participatory grant-making mechanism. And as a closing, there is a need to document accountability failures and human rights abuses, in addition to collect data for future remedy and to study them to chart a way forward. Documentation may entail demanding transparent policy decisions about resource allocations, contracting government support to victims of, for example, gender-based violence and sexual violence, and criteria for deciding which services are essential and enshrining them in regulations, policies, and laws. And in the opposite ways, government should not to be allowed to use the crisis situation to curtail already existing rights, such as the Hungarian government/parliament did in relation to transgender rights, despite of the revolutionary international evidence-based and rights-based policy development, for example, on ICD-11. Promoting accountability is even more urgent as sexual health and rights concerns grow more acute in crisis circumstances, and modes of governance and oversight practices are relaxed in the name of emergency response. So I would stop here with a positive note that although only 4 months passed, we already gained evidence and we learned so much. So we should be ready to act differently from today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. I want to remind people that this is the very first of a series of conversations. And much as we have heard many of the problems related to COVID, we are also hearing some answers, which we will need. But these will be hopefully provided during the rest of the series, in which such issues as pleasure, disability, diversity, the role of research, education, and of course, gender-based violence will be addressed. So please continue with us through the next months in discussing these important issues to us. Now I'm going to ask some of the questions that have come up on the chat. And unfortunately, we don't have time to go one by one, but we have selected some of the most important issues. But be sure that if you need to have precise answers from our panelists, you can always reach them through us, or directly. So Pedro, please, this is something that has come up several times again. COVID and is very much related to mental health. Can you please elaborate how, what has been the impact, the psychological impact related to sexual health during COVID? Could you please give us some ideas on this?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Esther. That is actually a very, very important question, and also a very broad question. From what I know, we have recent data. There's not a lot of data yet, but there's a number of studies going on, and I had access to some preliminary data, actually on the impact of all the COVID situation, particularly the confinement issues and the lockdown, and what was the impact of those measures in several countries on mental health, emotional health, on relationships, or healthy, or on the satisfaction of the relationship, and also on some, I would say, sexual health indicators, sexual pleasure and sexual activities. And one of the things which is clear across this preliminary data that we have or that I am aware of is that, of course, first of all, there's diversity. I think I should say this before anything else. We should not assume that everyone will have the same kind of impact, and particularly we should not assume that the impact is always negative. This is a very important message, because a significant part of people, individuals, actually increase to some extent not only their emotional health, but also sexual health, even pleasure, etc., etc. So we need to consider diversity. But the impact on mental health was relatively strong in many countries where there's already some preliminary data. And I would say depression and anxiety, which actually are already conditions which are relatively high. So most people really tend to say that let's say emotions related to anxiety and depression, they tended to become higher, worse. And this is very important, because this is also, there's a very strong connection between, of course, depression, anxiety, and sexual pleasure, sexual health, sexual satisfaction. So these are mental, emotional, and sexual health, they are very closely connected. So the impact was also important on, of course, on sexual health, on sexual satisfaction. One interesting thing, I have some preliminary data on, for instance, students, so young population. And it seems that, at least in Portugal, the data that I have access to is that in young population, the negative impact on sexuality was much clearer than in older population, or not so young population. So the general population in itself, the negative impact on sexuality was less strong than young population. And this, of course, there might be a number of reasons for that, including, of course, if you are apart or away from your regular partner, or to say, or even if you are in a polyamorous relationship, the lockdown seems to have a very strong impact on youth. Globally speaking, just to try to wrap up, I think, again, the impact was strong, related, of course, to mental health. And just as a final, I'll say, aspect that I want to emphasize, again, diversity, because people live the lockdown in very different situations. Some people were completely isolated from others. Others were together with the family, living 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with small apartments or houses with full of people, young people, children, etc. For others, this was an opportunity. As a couple, in many couples, they say this was a great opportunity to rediscover sexuality and pleasure with time and no pressure. So there's a huge variety of situations, and there's a huge variety of different impacts on relationship, also on mental health and on sexual health and even pleasure. So I think this is a very important message. And the most important, I think we should think about what does predict these differences. So what makes some more vulnerable to develop less satisfactory sexual lives or relationships or psychological aspects than others? What protects some and does not, and make others vulnerable? And this is also due to, of course, relationships, the type of relationships and the type of satisfaction and the communication and the sex communication, but also with your own, psychological aspects, your personality and the way you see life. And one very important aspect, which is psychological flexibility, which I'll say, in a way, it says very much about our ability to be flexible to live with all different crises and situations like this one. I'm not sure if I addressed completely, but I guess I just give a number of important contributions to continue talking about all of this impact.
Thank you very much, Pedro, especially for bringing up the matter of young people, because COVID and its impact on older people has driven away the question of how COVID is impacting the sexuality of young people and of children. We will talk about this, and we hope also to have young people to hear about their perspective and to see how we can overcome these problems. There is a very important question which has come up, not only directed to you, but to other panelists, in terms of what actions do you consider most important to promote sexual rights in your community or your country, and I might say even in your whole continent?
Thank you, Esther. For me, I believe we need to take this conversation into the smallest of spaces for us to have the maximum impact. And I'm saying so because we are looking at lifestyle, social norms, behavior, and the outcomes. The fact that I was raised in a patriarchal society where the rights of women and others are not respected does not mean I must continue to move with that or those set of notions. So if we bring the conversations to the lowest or smallest of spaces, then we will be educating ourselves. You know, each time we are thinking of making out something big, especially as it relates to sexuality, I always wonder, why is it that we don't self-examine? How tolerant am I of others? How willing am I to understand that my own understanding of normality may not be what normality is? How willing am I to embrace other notions and concepts? You see, if you look at racism and pre-colonial engagements, for instance, what has happened is that there was the oppressor and the oppressed. And the oppressor created the impression to the oppressed that everything about the oppressed in his or her society or in that society was bad. So let's throw away the bath, water, and the baby, and then let's see if we can make a new baby. But history has shown to us that there was nothing inherently bad in all societies, other than things needed to be improved. And I can talk about an inkling into sexual pleasure. Look at aphrodisiacs. In Africa, in my community, as well as several other communities, they are natural aphrodisiacs. Some of them are just vegetables, some of them are spices, some of them are drinks, and they are not intoxicating. And some of them, they can be said to be placebo. But people have come to believe that if they do those things or they use those things, it will improve their ability to give sexual pleasure to their partners. All those things we were told were fetish. But now, when the West is going organic, they are coming back to embrace what our ancestors had used and what they had. So all I'm going to say to wrap this up is that we need multi-level actions, but the multi-level actions will start with honest and factual conversations, truthful conversations, conversations that are supportive right from the smallest spaces that we have, and we can build up from there.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for focusing on the contributions of local culture in possible answers. Now I will turn to Esther Kismodi for some answers, if possible, to very relevant questions. One of them is, what are the rights, and how can you elaborate on the rights of people living with disabilities, and the same thing for trans people?
Thank you, Esther, for the question. From the early on the pandemic, I was in touch with Lizzie Kiyama, who is a brilliant disability rights activist from Kenya, and Mauro Cabral, who is a collaborator with WAS and the executive of Gates. And we were having conversations. So what's happening with people with disabilities? What's happening with transgender people? And very early on, separately, both of them said that, look, Esther, the situation is not new to us. We are being discriminated, we are being isolated, we don't have access to services, we are being discriminated within the healthcare sector because we live, it's just multiplied in many levels, our vulnerabilities. And they both pointed out very particular vulnerabilities and discrimination and violence that's happening against people with disabilities and transgender people. And so just addressing it separately, Lizzie pointed out that for them, like basic messages like hygiene, many the people with disabilities don't have access to water, and they don't have, like many other people, but they also don't have the possibility to go to fetch it. They are dependent on people to provide it to them. So when this assistance disappears from their daily life, they cannot protect themselves. Also in terms of menstrual hygiene, for example, there are very basic services disappeared because of the lack of mobility and because it was not recognized that how assistance is needed for people with disability and cannot just be blocked from one day to another because it's necessary for their daily life and existence, including in relation to sexual and reproductive health. And not to mention the abuse that people, on one hand, as PEDRO pointed out, they could get more attention in relation to sexual health, but no protection. So no protection against unwanted pregnancy. On the other hand, many people with disability, especially women and girls, live with the abusers. So it provided more space for the abusers to take advantage of them without any government help. And there are helplines, but they haven't been communicated necessarily so they reach the disability population. So for example, people with hearing impairment, they couldn't rely on radio and TV messages because they couldn't access them. So accessibility just again was a problem or is a problem. In terms of and the other one is legal capacity. So in many countries, people with disabilities, whether physical, intellectual, mental disability, in terms of decision making, accessing contraception, accessing condom, accessing abortion, are dependent on guardians to make those decisions. And very often the guardians are their abusers. So that put them in an absolute impossible situation to protect themselves or deal with the consequences of the abuse. In terms of transgender people, Mauro pointed out that many trans people, including trans sex workers, and this is when intersectional vulnerability, and I saw that Tamara, you are here, I know you cannot speak, but even it's like trans people living in economic crisis, living in humanitarian crisis, their sources of income have disappeared at so many levels in many places, and they are not eligible for economic support, and or the support is just not available. For many trans people, like people with disability or many other people in this world, stay at home is an impossible directive because access to housing and even to shelter is still precarious, and homelessness is a common reality among many people, many transgender people. Many trans people are experiencing police brutality without the crisis, but the crisis also provided an opportunity for further discrimination for transgender people. And as many other poor, black, brown, and otherwise racialized people, trans people are trapped in the same class and race marginalization grid, and are particularly vulnerable. Trans migrants in a particularly precarious situation. And also in terms of gender-affirming healthcare, basically disappeared in many countries. When the reality is, and maybe and others on the call, like I know that, for example, the only transgender clinic in Cape Town, people are on the waiting list for years to be able to get hormonal treatment or other transgender health services. And basically those services disappeared from the planet during this period, when especially hormonal treatment like contraception, alternative solution exist in terms of liaising with pharmacies, liaising with mobile services, telemedicine. So the easy solution for many governments just to stop the services, justify that they are not essential services, without even exploring the alternative solutions.
Thank you very much, Esther. Yes, I agree very much on what you have said. And just as a note, recently I had a question, or rather a comment, from trans person in a country in Latin America, where people are expected, or they are given permission to go out of lockdown for certain times of the day, men at one time and women at the other time. And this person asked me, what are we going to do? Where do we fit? I mean, we are once again discriminated in a very systematic way by the government. Thank you. And I will turn on our last round to UM with a quite important question. Sexual health services and sexual rights need to be supported by strong and systematic comprehensive sexuality education at all levels: school, family, community, governments, including religious leaders. How is sexuality education, how are the sexuality education levels and policies in Africa?
Thank you, Esther, for this question. And I want to minimize my, okay. Candidly speaking, access to age-appropriate comprehensive sexuality education is a big challenge in Africa. And the challenge is because duty bearers are afraid of the notion of comprehensive sexuality education. They always bandy around the untruth that access to comprehensive sexuality education is an attempt to induce or coerce young people in Africa to become gays, lesbians, and transgender. And those of us who are advocates and activists in the field, we have continued to engage to say this is not so. In fact, I know that shortly before the COVID-19 pandemic in Ghana, for instance, a country that had launched the guidelines for comprehensive sexuality education and was about to roll out comprehensive sexuality education, suddenly there was this very strong movement that came to Ghana and said that this was a satanic agenda to destroy Africa and Africans. And that rolled back all the many gains that have been made. But I'm not giving up hope. And there are many more advocates and activists like me who are exploring alternative means of providing age-appropriate comprehensive sexuality education. And thank God for COVID-19. Now we know that if we institute online interactive learning across the continent in the languages that people can understand, using all the nuances that they can relate to in their specific context and cultures, that we may be having a headway. Therefore, the challenge will be a resource flow challenge, both human, technology, access to technology, and as well as financials to roll this out. I know that Marlene has been doing some great work in South Africa, I think with either Google or Microsoft, and I know that we can make this a continent-wide effort. So on this note, I want to say yes, we are not there yet, but yes, there is a hope that we can get it to where we want to be and we can engage with people across the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, UM. And one last reflection, please, 2 minutes from 1 minute from each one of your from the participants. And there's a question for Esther Kismodi on what has been the role of internet and particularly what has happened with pornography. Is it being more used during COVID? Can you please give us some insights into these?
Thank you, Esther. I would go back to Pedro's conclusion that sexual experiences were very diverse or are very diverse during this period. And the internet for many people and cyber sex in particular and pornography was a very important mean in experiencing sexual pleasure, sexuality, either alone or with partners who are, when people were confined in different places. So it was a very enabling factor for many. On the other hand, cautiousness were raised about children who were using the internet increasingly, and as a mother of 2 boys, it's like, how can I control internet use in a reasonable way? And very often, I have to admit, between homeschooling and work, I had no idea what the kids are doing. And I think we are seeing increasing tools and reiteration already existing tools, cyber sex and abuse of cyber sex and pornography is happening already without the crisis. So there are a lot of privacy measures there for adults and for children. And I think it's very important not to see pornography and cyber sex as a per definition harmful creation of our modern technology, but as an opportunity, but also as a potentially harmful institution and tool, as many other institutions can be, like marriage, for example. It's created for happiness and pleasure in relation to sexual life, and very often it's abusive. Pornography and cyber sex can be a tool for experiencing healthy sexuality, sexual pleasure, but it can be abused. So I think that conversations are very important with this regard in both sense.
Thank you very much, Esther. And Pedro, we're about going to the end of this session. And can you please give us a final message?
Thank you very much, Esther. Let me just address very shortly this question of pornography and also the question of internet use, etc. And as Esther said, I will just want to emphasize, I mean, of course, there's a number of problems related to that with abuse, but at the same time, this was a very, very important tool for people to deal with distance. And this, we are seeing on our surveys that people use much more pornography, but also use it the internet and the ability to communicate with partners, with potential sexual partners, which are not present face-to-face or in person. So this was played a very important role. But I want just to conclude, I will just want to share 2 or 3 main ideas, which I think are very important also from the point of view of WAS, of the World Association for Sexual Health. I mean, I would like to thank to Esther Kismadi UM, and of course also Esther for their contribution today. We have seen there's a huge number of different aspects, a huge number of impacts, both negative and also positive also, which is important. But what I think we should be prepared is that this is, I think, the first phase. I mean, we have the confinement, the lockdowns, but this will be a long journey. There will be, and there's already a very strong economic and social impact. And we need to be prepared also for the impact of what is happening beyond the COVID in itself. And we need to, again, I think one of the main positive messages is that I think we are communicated more. We are doing more work in partnership with others. We are more united. And I think this is the opportunity to let us bring us together to work to promote sexual health and rights. Because otherwise, as the wise words of OM at the end, if we just work alone, we can go far, but we will not achieve our aims. And I think this is a very important message. The other message is that we need to hear from people. I mean, we are a global organization, but we are made of organizations and colleagues and professions from around the world. We need to hear you. And this is, I think these conversations, this series of conversation is a starting point. It's not just top down, tell you what is going on and what to do, but we need to hear from what is happening on the ground. Because only with your experience, with your input, we can know and we can work to achieve and to promote rights and sexual health for others. So be united, work together, and we'll be stronger. And please, please participate. We need to hear from all of you and join WAS.
Thank you very much, Pedro. And now I'm going to turn up to our host, Dr. Elna Rudolph, for the final words on this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Esther, and thank you so much to all of our panelists. And a big thank you to all of the participants. A special thank you to the WAS members who joined us today. Did you know that you can become a member of WAS? Your organization can be a member, or you can become an individual member of WAS. Please visit our website. Michelle, I'll ask you to just post the links to our website in the chat again, and please also look out for the link to become a member in the chat box. And then also please go and like our page on Facebook, World Association for Sexual Health. And you can also go and like the Sexual Health Day page on Facebook. We will share that with you in the chat as well. The World Sexual Health Day is on the 4th of September every year. And this year, our theme is sexual pleasure in the times of COVID-19. So please remember that this is a series of conversations. Our next conversation will be in partnership with the International Society for Sexual Medicine on the 23rd of July. And our topic will be sexual rights at the core of sexual health intervention. We're going to teach the medical fraternity a thing or two about sexual rights. Please join in our conversation. Please connect with us. Send us your email address in Messenger on Facebook if you haven't been receiving updates from WAS, and send us your thoughts and be part of this conversation going forward. Please now enjoy this video from South Africa. Traveling is restricted right now, but we want you to put South Africa right at the top of your wish list and to come and join us for our next conference. Thank you. Bye-bye.
There's something about the soil, something different. Because of all the places humanity could have started, it chose this place. That's why the stories that come out of here are unlike any you've heard before. And Everyone has a story.
I've got a story to tell.
Some stories make sure a truth is never, ever forgotten. Some stories make us understand our reality. Some stories start small and then turn into towering monuments. Some stories start slow and then run away with you. Stories that move you. Stories of Voramabulane, Ositao, Lebotulare. People who say Dumelang Lekai because we greet you, those who come before you and continue to walk with you now. It is in why we say Sawubona. Because beyond a greeting, it acknowledges your very presence that indeed, Ngiyakubona. That is our way. That is the story of our humanity. And it's time to experience it once again. A message from South African Tourism.
Thank you very much. We hope to see you in South Africa soon, but before that, on the 23rd of July, we will see you in conjunction with the ISSM. Thank you. Bye-bye.